Did you know that the first edition of Dungeons & Dragons had a rule when players could get experience points for collecting gold from dungeons? This so-called XP for gold system encouraged finding creative ways to overcome challenges, not necessarily using brute force. Just like Bilbo Baggins stole the Arkenstone in The Hobbit.
I will not part with a single coin, not one piece of it.
It's the perfect example of how players can be directed through progression, a set of guiding mechanics that let the player advance and unlock new content. It can be implemented through combat, exploration, or even kicking chickens in Fable. And I like a sense of progress, as much as I hate when it's faked by presenting unimpactful upgrades which you don't really notice. With all due respect to all existing looter shooters, they can be pretty frustrating when you're forced to change a weapon because its damage is 10% lower in comparison to newer guns. But the last year was rich in games that managed to keep me engaged from start to the very end. Crafting incantations in Hades 2 and building outposts in the altars was so satisfying that there wasn't a single time when I felt bored. The thing is that good progression is hard to notice because it has always been a part of game's DNA, but it becomes obvious when it's absent or doesn't work. So let's dive into level ups, new skills, upgrades, and think how to make them fun. You already know about XP-based progression, when the player gets experience for specific actions and at some point gets a new level or a skill. Let's call it the accumulative system. And the main decision which should be made here by a designer is what actions give XP, because exactly these actions will be attracting the most attention. This system can be seen in Baldur's Gate 3, Borderlands and Guardians of the Galaxy.
Actually, maybe we can stick around for a bit.
The same D&D has a different approach, which I believe most game masters actually prefer – milestones. Instead of accumulating something to get better, new skills or levels are gained directly for reaching important goals. Mostly linear games stick to it, like Doom Eternal, where new weapons, upgrades and collectibles can be found right in the field. Milestone system provides more control over arrangement of new tools and challenges, which is super important to keep the right level of difficulty. Imagine if the game would throw a Marauder to a player who hasn't got Ballista or the Super Shotgun. Accumulative and milestone systems can and often are combined. If we take a look at Jedi Fallen Order, we can see that there are gained through combat and XP skill points, but there are also tools and force powers which can be found during exploration or given by characters. So the game has some main paths important for its Metroidvania level design, but also leaves some amount of freedom through XP-based skill system. These were fairly obvious ways of game advancement that existed even in tabletop RPGs. But there are also two others, and one of them is the investment system. The best example is the altars, where you can extract different resources and invest them to expand your mining infrastructure, or to research new buildings and their upgrades in order to extract more resources and do it in circles. That's like the most high-level description of the altar's core gameplay possible. There are also many details, like the design of the research tree with its own progression, the altars who serve as both management tools and sources of narrative, exploration gameplay where the player has to fight anomalies, and I hope you're still awake, because the point is that this system is kinda similar to the XP one, but instead of accumulating some currency to get an abstract point, resources in the altars can be spent arbitrarily and in different proportions. Strategy games use it often, and even Hades 2 does it as well, because incantations require components.
By light of moon, together let us shape reality. So mote it be.
Lights
And probably the least common of all is the usage system, which could be seen in the Bethesda and Obsidian games. In Skyrim, if you use magic, you'll become proficient in magic, if you use a bow, you'll improve the archery skill, and so on. I think it's a pretty elegant system, I would even say immersive, if you know what I mean. But I guess it works well only in more actiony games, and it's more suitable for more or less sandbox type of gameplay, where players have different ways to approach a task. Cool, now we have different ways to allow players to earn skill points, stash some currency and define the general way of how it's possible to advance. But didn't we forget about something? Oh, that's right. Why would players need any of that? They should have something to spend it on, so let's talk about new mechanics and content. There are infinite options of what can be included in a game as a part of progression. Double jumps, combat moves, different weapons, spells, increased attributes. There is no clear answer as to what's better, but I'll try to provide a perspective which should help. I hope. Generally, advancement options in games can be split in two broad categories. The horizontal ones, that's when players unlock new content or mechanics, and the vertical, which are about depth of what we already know or have, increase in stats or extending functionality. In the alters, new modules and outposts are examples of the horizontal progression, when improving their efficiency or making them more reliable are the vertical ones. The same applies to new weapons and their modes in Doom Eternal. I don't believe any engaging game can live without some amount of horizontal options, whether it's a story, new locations or abilities. And there are games focused only on this type of new content like the ones from Hazelight Studio. It Takes Two has dozens of different mechanics, platforming, shooting, puzzles and many more. This game constantly juggles them and it feels like you've opened a huge Christmas gift with many small presents inside. The advantage of this approach is that the game feels fresh right until its credits, but the flaw is that it's actually expensive to reassemble a game over and over again, and that gameplay in this case may lack depth. If this trade-off should be mitigated, the vertical progression could be applied, and it can be not only increasing attributes but also providing new options to existing mechanics. Borderlands 2 has a ton of interesting skills. Axton can learn how to place his turret on walls or ceilings, Zero can start throwing kunai during his invisibility, and Mai is able to apply elemental damage to targets caught in her phase lock ability. So the advice here would be to define a core gameplay part which brings fun and doesn't overwhelm new players. Then it's time to think how it can be diversified through horizontal type of content. It can be separate mechanics that will help players catch their breath between main gameplay sections, perhaps it will be new locations to change the atmosphere, or new enemies and bosses that will affect difficulty curve. And after that, it's worth taking a look at the gameplay complexity. If players get bored over time, probably it's time to include some upgrades and choose a suitable advancement system. Now the hardest part is done. There should be some ideas of what could be included in progression and through what system it's better to get it out. The last step is to figure out how to match these two and in what form to present. The most common way to visualize progression is a skill tree. It can be met everywhere: shooters, actions and even survivals. The Alters has a pretty cool one which was inherited from the developer's previous game, Frostpunk. It has a few levels that should be unlocked and different sections that offer both horizontal and vertical progression options. If a skill tree looks terrifying to develop, just like this one, then new options can be presented in the form of a list like Hades 2 does with its incantations, or you can always just give new stuff to the players directly, which works well with the milestone system. But no matter what form of presentation is chosen, there is a design rule I'd like to share. It's called the Miller's Law, and it states that the average human working memory can hold from 5 to 9 objects at once. As an example, you can see it in the structure of mobile numbers, or in most game UIs dedicated for progression. Just pay attention that there are really mostly from 5 to 9 possible options at once. We talked about progression systems, directions of its options and even ways to present this madness. According to the Miller's Law, it's time to stop. And we have uncovered the topics of permanent and non-permanent upgrades, as well as resettable and meta ones. This you can do on your own. But as a conclusion, I wanna point out that the most important is that any progression should be impactful. Sluggishly changing numbers or recoloring stuff will likely look artificial, and even a small amount of impactful upgrades or new mechanics will be better than a huge amount of invisible ones. If it's a new location, let it be completely different from what players have already seen. If it's a skill, let it change the way mechanics should be effectively used. And if it's a fully new mechanic, then you'll be probably wasted, but try to make it on the same level of quality as others. What to consider as impactful enough, QA and playtest results should point out. If you're a game developer, likely this video was useful to systemize different kinds of progression. And if you're a gamer, I hope you had some fun. In any case, I will be grateful if you write some thoughts and feedback in the comments. I read all of them and often answer. And don't forget to subscribe. See you on Unburied.